It's my second experience. My best friend and I lived 10 years in a village. When I was 15, my family moved to a small town near the village. It was okay because you had to walk only 45 minutes. Between these two places, there was a forest. Every time one of us had to walk there in the night, we called each other. It was a short but creepy street with a large dog, forest animals, and sometimes drunk people, and we felt safe while walking. One day, it was deep in the night. He called me again, but it was different. He sounded scared, and I heard some kind of laughing in the background. I asked him what that was, but he didn't want to talk about it. He only asked me to tell him something so he didn't have to think about it. As he walked, the laughing didn't get silent. It's only a 5-minute walk in the forest, but it had to be less loud. Till today, we have no idea what that was. Some people say it could be a bird or some other animal. I know some animals around very strange at night. I live in Germany, so there's no mountain lion thing or tropical bird. The laughing had a sound like someone mixed a witch and a psychopath. Some details could be a little different. It's been like 8 years. Never heard something like that again. I went to the Birdcage Theatre in Tombstone earlier that day, then returned to my hotel over a silver mine. Around 2 a.m, I awoke to a flashing light. The front door is lateral to my bed, and its window has a curtain over it. The tiny space between the curtain and the window sheds light right into my eyes. Then there was an urgent, quick, yet muted knock on the door. Around 8 to 10 knocks in very quick succession. Then the door handle started to turn back and forth aggressively. Luckily, it was locked, and I thought it was an intruder with malintent or someone who was lost looking for the other apartments on site. Then, I heard the sound of an old clock's second hand start ticking away in the corner of the room next to the door. I remembered there was no clock there, which I confirmed in the morning. The second hand continued for about an hour. I got out of bed during this time and peeked out the windows. There were no lights outside, no sign of cars, no footsteps circling. It was extremely cold, even though the heater was on pretty high. I got out of bed pretty quickly after the intruder heard me grab a weapon to defend myself. There were no other sounds, like footsteps or anything, except the clock continued. I was sure it was a human, but everything about this seemed too weird. Like I couldn't replicate the knock sound on the door or the walls, and the handle turning only sounded the same when I tried it from outside. There are security cameras, but I haven't heard back yet as to whether someone approached the door seeking entry. The weirdest part for me was the sound of the clock, because that is the only thing I cannot explain if it were a real person. There's a lot of superstitions where I'm from. One of the famous ones that many believe in the Philippines is that when someone dies, a moth visits, and they say it contains the spirit of the dead or an ancestor. Years ago, my wife's grandpa was not looking well anymore, and they worried he might die anytime soon due to his sickness. He spent his final waking moments at home, laying in his bed and having his family say their goodbyes. A few hours after everybody did so, he passed away peacefully. My wife's aunt broke the news to everybody in the house, and just as they all gathered in his room while waiting for the morticians to come, there was a big moth that had entered the room without anyone noticing, and it remained there throughout the night. Some say that it's their grandpa, as the belief goes, but another weird thing happened right after he passed. As if in unison, the dogs in the neighborhood started howling for several minutes, as if the moth wasn't creepy enough. The next day, just when neighbors started to learn that my wife's grandpa passed away the night before, a neighbor and friend of the family came to them and asked when the grandpa passed away. And when he learned it was the night before, he couldn't believe it. He told them that last night he saw their grandpa walk out of the house with a little girl holding hands with him, although he never saw the little girl's face or where they were going. Oddly enough, when my wife's grandpa fell ill some time ago, he told me a little girl visited him and kept telling him to come with her, but he never would. Not sure if that was the same little girl that the neighbour saw, but it was eerily coincidental. I don't really know what category my experience would fall under, but earlier this year in summer, I had a really strange experience when I went out fishing that I've never really been able to shake off. It started off normal. It was a warm, windy day with an overcast. I was making my way to a fishing spot that was just out of town. This place was an open beach that is located at the mouth of a river. It's quite the hotspot during summer, so there are always at least a handful of people fishing in the area. But when I arrived, the beach car park was completely empty. This really didn't raise much concern because at the time I went on a Tuesday and assumed most people would be at work. However, I've fished on other weekdays and there's always been at the very least 1 or 2 people fishing. Anyways, I continue on as normal and cast my fishing line. Around 45 minutes go by and nothing happens. The sounds of seagulls and albatross permeate my surroundings. And then I get this growing feeling inside me that something was wrong. It felt like I was somewhere where I shouldn't be. The best way I can really explain the feeling is like the same you get inside of an empty mall, or walking down a really long hallway, or as if you just trespassed somewhere, if that makes sense. This is where it gets really weird, because the wind then suddenly drops along with the sounds of the wildlife, like a switch. All I heard was the sound of the waves, but something wasn't quite right with that either. It was like the same wave sounds were playing over and over again. The best way I can explain it is as if a small piece of time had been sectioned off and it was being played in a loop. At that point, I was really startled when I noticed this, and the same feeling at the start was growing more and more. It hadn't even been a whole hour and a half I was there, and I decided that I shouldn't stay there any longer and noped out of there. Now, I don't know if I would consider that as a paranormal experience per se, as you could argue that everything that happened was just a string of coincidences, which is possible. But I just can't get over the abrupt halt of the ambient wind and sounds. That to me was the really strange, unnerving part about the whole experience. As a disclosure, I'm skeptical of ghosts now as a grown adult, but I've recently started becoming more interested in the supernatural again. And I remember experiencing things in St. Augustine as a child that still make me feel a little uneasy to this day. My friends insisted they'd truly seen spirits for themselves with their own 2 eyes. But perhaps the oddest part of all was that even professional adults working at this school as teachers, public safety officers, dormitory supervisors, etc., also said they'd had experiences on the campus, like seeing doors slamming out of nowhere. In general, we were never told by the adults that ghosts aren't real, ever. Instead, we were told that there was no reason to be afraid and not to let such stories or sightings bother us. My first year at the school, I lived in a dormitory for girls in grades 6, 7 and 8, which was supposed to be very haunted. I occasionally felt as if someone was watching me when no one was around, and often felt cold currents of air at random during hot, sweaty months, during the dead of night in a room with no air conditioning. The latter was probably just external airflow making its way inside via cracks or gaps in the walls. But my roommate and I were still terrified at the time. I still remember that more than once, I'd end up not sleeping at all and relating my fears at breakfast the next morning with the staff working the night shifts. I was told to never go to the bathroom on the first floor during the night. This wasn't an issue because I only lived on the second floor, but there was a famous sighting of a ghost of a person with a broken neck, and my friends claimed that they'd seen the apparition as well. Once, during an unrehearsed fire drill one evening, a few girls told the dorm supervisors they'd just spotted someone in one of the windows, and they were too terrified to go back inside. I know they weren't deliberately trying to find an excuse to not go back indoors, because some of them had only towels on from being caught in the shower when the fire drill first started. When the supervisors did a head count, no one was missing. Despite this, the supervisors looked worried, even as they told everyone to go back inside. There were constantly strange smells around the school that we couldn't place, and rumours of deaths on campus, such as a blind girl who died from horrific burns in the shower long ago, or a woman who was murdered by her mother. Some of these stories were even told by the adults who worked on the campus. So, truthfully, while I may be skeptical now, I've had enough experiences and heard or seen enough from others to still feel that there's a window of possibility for there being more to reality than can be understood on a mortal level. I think if I hadn't ever lived in a place like St. Augustine, I'd be a lot more closed off to the possibility of such. And if I had lived there longer, I only attended school there for a total of 3 years, perhaps I'd have eventually seen something that would have made me be a believer for good. So for background, we rent, in an older house from the 1930s, and we moved in October 2020. My husband was deployed until the end of November 2020, so he wasn't there at first. It's 2 stories with 1 bedroom, living, dining, kitchen and bathroom upstairs, and a finished basement with a bedroom, bathroom and storage room. Our daughter sleeps upstairs and we sleep in the finished basement. I'm a huge skeptic, and I don't quite believe in ghosts, but I definitely believe in demons because of my religion. For this reason, I'm pretty freaked out by the paranormal. When I moved, my mom and dad helped me move in. They live pretty far, so they stayed a few weeks. One day, my mom asked me why I was pacing the house all night. I told her I heard it too, and it must have been the pipes creaking. This is a regular occurrence in our house, and it really freaks my mom out, but I attribute it to wood floors and old pipes. My mom comes to visit in May, and we take a trip to see some family. While I'm gone, my husband tells me how terrifying it is to be there, alone with the footsteps. While he's downstairs, he hears pounding on the door. He grabs a gun and runs out, but there's no one there. I'm under 30 seconds. It's almost impossible to get out of sight of our door, between the busy road and 2 large parking lots. Strange, but he dismissed it. We got a Ring camera. A month later, there's pounding at our door again. Our Blink camera registers absolutely nothing. Or maybe the Wi-Fi wasn't doing well, since my husband was gaming. We figured maybe it was the back door and we mistook it for the side door. This was pretty hard to explain away, honestly. A few months go by with nothing. Then, while my husband is out hanging out with some friends, I decide to get in the shower. The shower is directly under the dining room. I hear the chairs scraping across the floor and assume our robot vacuum has started and maybe my husband put it on a schedule. So I check our indoor camera and find the robot sitting in the living room. I go check and see 2 chairs have been moved. Thankfully, my husband is almost home and he calms me down. He tells me the chairs might have been out of place before my shower and maybe the sound was air in the pipes. No big deal. This is an old house after all. Then earlier, I was sitting in our recliner with my daughter, who has a crout. She's passed out in my lap. It's a heated, vibrant recliner, so it's on and it's not exactly quiet. My husband went to Walmart to get some popsicles and shower steamers, so it's just me, the baby, and the dog. I see what I think is my husband creeping through the dining room, and I hear him messing with something on the table and maybe with the door. Then my husband texts me, "I'm checking out at Walmart now." So I'm panicking, but I don't want to wake my daughter. I still can't hear it moving around. I think maybe it's a mouse, but I know that's ridiculous. My dog lifts his head up and looks into the dining room. He perks his ears and stares for about 30 seconds, and then puts his head down. I felt better knowing he was aware and not afraid. My husband gets home and confirms there's no one in the house. Earlier that day, my husband and I got into an argument, and I took my rings off, bad I know, and told him if he isn't okay with just one kid, he needs to marry someone else. We're struggling to conceive, and it's been really hard on me knowing he's desperate for another kid, and I'm okay if it never happens. I hadn't put my rings back on, and they were still on the dining room table by the door, right where the rings were. We have 2.5 weeks left until we can move. It can't come fast enough. I'm afraid to be alone here. My sister and I were just talking on the phone about some strange things that had happened to us all throughout our time in our childhood home. I mentioned that I thought our home was haunted because our mother had taken a rock from Auschwitz and brought it back home. My working theory is that the rock itself carries energies or memories or spirits that are imprinted into the stone because of the horrific trauma within the walls of the concentration camp. My sister and I were sharing stories and experiences we had had that correlated with the time the rock had been in our family home, as well as correlated to the movement of the rock from room to room. I'm very aware that what my mom did was disrespectful and disturbed some energies. It's just taken a long time to put two and two together about our experiences and this object. I'm thinking of contacting a rabbi from a local synagogue to ask what the best way to go about this is. But if any of you have any ideas or information that could maybe help us out in our search, we'd really appreciate it. Just for reference, things we would experience in our house were physical pain unrelated to any obvious injury, mental health struggles and thoughts of ending our own lives, unexplained and unintelligible whispering or shouting, loud bangs with no discernible cause, strange sounds coming from underneath the floor in my bedroom, odd lights and anomalies in my sister's bedroom, and an atmosphere of constant unease or anxiety. Any ideas you all have would be greatly appreciated. We don't know how to go about this, but we definitely want to talk to our mom about having something done to cleanse the house, and doing something with the rock that honours the spirits of the innocent dead, while banishing any evil spirits connected to it. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, my mother, father, grandmother and I went to this restaurant out in a semi-remote location. It has since been turned into a factory area, but at this time it was a log cabin type restaurant, back off the road in the woods. My father is a big talker. He'll pretty much have a really long conversation with anyone if they get to talking. He was closing up a conversation with this guy whom he went to high school. He hadn't seen in a long time. My mother, grandmother and I went outside to head onto the vehicle. I was getting a little tired because it was late, so my grandmother picked me up. She was holding me like a bear hug, and I had my head on her shoulder. And behind the restaurant, illuminated by a telephone pole/streetlight, I saw a very tall figure. It was probably 7 to 8 feet tall, completely covered in blonde hair, sort of like Cousin It from Addams Family, but with more noticeable features. I said, "Grammy, there's a monster." She turned around and saw it too. She started running towards the car. About this time, my mother saw it too. It didn't come towards us. It just turned and stared at us. We were all freaking out, and then my dad came out of the building. He started running too because we were terrified. He didn't see it though, because once he came around, it took off into the woods, or at least out of eyesight. I know Bigfoot seems like a hard pill to swallow, but I saw something that night. I know I was a child, but we all saw it. My mom and I talked about it for the first time in years today because we drove past the place the restaurant used to be. And she described it exactly how I remember it. Since around 2014, I think, my brain doesn't process time well. I've had periodic experiences with something that I've been to calling the bathroom ghost. A vast number of these experiences have happened in or around the bathroom of places I lived or stayed at for some odd reason. The first encounter in what I think was 2014, I was at a friend's house where I often spent the night. I was in my sophomore or junior year of high school at the time. I always got a lot of strange feelings in that house. The air felt heavy and wrong in a way that I couldn't quite explain or articulate. And certain rooms I just couldn't be in because they would make me feel anxious for some reason. Anyway, one of these days I was staying over, I heard something strange that scared me half to death while I was in the bathroom. To the left of me was the door. To the right was the bathtub. On my right side, I heard a voice whisper, "Hey," clear as day, not far from my ear. It made me jump out of my skin, and I recognized that it sounded exactly like my friend's voice. Now, the speed with which I convinced myself it must have somehow just been the shower curtains shifting was honestly remarkable. But just as soon as I'd calmed myself down, it did it again. "Hey," in that whispered tone, in my friend's voice. Needless to say, I got out of that room as fast as possible. Now, I want to clarify that there was no way this could have actually been my friend. Reasons being that A, the voice came from the side of the room opposite the door, and there was no nearby room through which he could have spoken through the wall or something. Also, the voice wasn't muffled in any way. B, I could clearly hear my friend talking loudly to his mom in the living room, which was at least 30 feet from the bathroom door. Now, I only experienced this once in that house, but here's why I think that whatever this thing was, it's followed me. In my first apartment with my friends, there was one notable circumstance of something happening in the bathroom. Now, this may not have been the same thing. It wasn't a voice which mimicked one of my friends. This was at least 3 to 4 years after the first experience. But myself and my 2 roommates were all sitting in the living room watching movies when we suddenly heard an odd sound from the bathroom. The hairdryer had turned itself on. It had been plugged in, so maybe it was just a spooky coincidence. But there hadn't been any sort of power surge to have triggered it, and we were all pretty spooked. There were a couple of other interesting, brief experiences in that apartment, but those are even less potentially related, I think. So maybe those can be shared some other time. The most recent experience, which truly makes me believe that this thing has followed me, happened just last year. Not too long after moving into my current apartment. Once again, I was in the bathroom, and I heard a voice come from the door. Clear as day, I heard my fiance's voice say, "Hello?" Reasonably, I had assumed that they had came to the door to talk to me, which we do with some frequency, so I responded back, "Hello?" I didn't get any further response, so I started to get a bit nervous. My fiance had been in the bed when I went to the bathroom, and the bedroom is just next door. But we have long since learned that we can't hear each other if one of us yells from the bed towards the bathroom. Hence why we sometimes stand outside the door to talk. I got out and, a bit nervous, asked if they had been trying to speak to me through the door. They were lying down where I left them when I came into the room, and they very casually told me that no, they hadn't. Fully shaken now, I told them what I heard, and they were a little amused, like, the bathroom ghost strikes again, which I did also find funny. They weren't making fun of me for being a little freaked out by any means. My fiancée is not the type of person who tries to scare other people by messing with them, so I know they weren't just playing a joke on me and acting like they had no idea what I meant. I'm an ICU nurse in France. The ICU ward is made of a long corridor providing access to 4 units of 5 rooms. One night shift, we talked about ghosts with co-workers, and I stated that they do not exist at all. Around 1 hour later, a patient begins to spit blood as usual, so I go with my co-worker to suck the blood out of his mouth with the suction unit. After 5 minutes of suction, the unit stopped the suction. I thought a blood clot was blocking the system. I followed the line to see the clot, and nothing to see except that the device is turned off. It's a key we have to put on or off. I tried to rationalize the event, but it's not an electrical device, so dysfunction is impossible. Strange feeling. My co-worker told me that I should keep my mouth shut, because someone has something to say to me. Later in the same night, 2 patients separated by 2 rooms told us they saw a woman in pink. We all wear white uniforms. No visitors are allowed after 10 p.m. and it was 3 a.m. Goosebumps. No more unsettling event for the rest of the night. The following day, nearly 3 a.m. in one room, a light constantly lit up by itself. Every time we turn the light off, it lights up when we exit the room. We could stay in the room. The light remains off, but as soon as we leave this room, the light turns on. After 5 light on, off, on, I turned off the light and said, "Enough, I've had it," and the light remains off. 3 days later, near 3 a.m. again, we heard a huge crack on the unit door, and the doors began to shake. We looked at each other, and new crack, new shaking. We trek through the windows and we can see no one. The corridor's lights remains off, motion sensor. Some weird shit happened later involving the death of a patient, but I can't say more for obvious purposes. This happened to me a few years ago, and it wasn't until today that I realised I may have been in some sort of danger. My husband and I were camping with 2 friends in a pretty remote area, deep in the mountains, on the shore of a small lake. Our first morning there, I decided to paddleboard to the other side of the lake. One thing about me, I have submechanophobia, which is fear of submerged objects in water. It doesn't affect me too badly. I love the water, but I get the heebie-jeebies when I see sunken boats, large fallen trees, massive boulders in the water. Stuff like that. It's worse when I'm alone. I do pretty okay when other people are with me, and it has to be a large, clear body of water. Swimming pools, rivers, or lakes where the water isn't super clear don't bother me. So I go off by myself on my board. The lake is one big oval, so you can basically see everything from the shoreline. However, where we had set up camp, you couldn't see the whole lake, so I quickly lost sight of my husband. I started to freak out a little bit because I had immediately seen a big sunken tree. This is a high Sierra lake, so the water is crystal clear, but quickly turns black because of how deep it is. I told myself I was being silly and needed to get over my dumb phobia. I didn't really see anything else, but I decided to stay close to shore because usually that makes me feel better. But this lake doesn't really have a typical shore. It's all granite rock that just quickly and steeply drops into the water. I still don't really see much in the water, but I'm really starting to panic, which is weird. I have this overwhelming feeling to go back as fast as I can, but I think I'm just being dumb. I try to deep breathe because I really want to get to the other side, where there is a waterfall. So I trudge on trying to calm myself and enjoy nature, yet still feeling like I should go back. As I'm paddling, I start to realize how alone I am. I keep looking around hoping to see a hiker, but I'm completely by myself. I try not to think about that because I'm almost to the waterfall and the view is gorgeous. As I get closer, I see there is an island, for lack of a better word. Just a large amount of granite that is fairly close to shore. There's a single plastic chair sitting on the island, which is funny, but slightly unsettling because it's such a weird thing to see so deep in nature. I'm still freaked, so I figured if I got off my board and onto the island, I would feel better because I would be on land and my phobia wouldn't bother me. I pull up my board and I start walking around, trying to enjoy the view, but I just can't. I feel terrified. The waterfall is so much louder now that I'm near it, and I realise if I were to scream, no one would hear me. My husband is the only person around for miles, and he can't see or hear me, and I'm terrified. I keep looking around because I feel like I'm being watched. I decided I can't take this. Even if it's just my stupid irrational fear, I have to get back as fast as I can. I get on my board and paddle down the centre of the lake rather than keep to the shore, because it's quicker that way. It takes everything in me to do it. I can't shake the feeling I'm being watched, and I feel so damn vulnerable in the centre of this deep blue lake. I'm shaking the whole way back, but as I'm getting closer to camp, relief sweeps through me. I get off the board and go see my husband. He happily asks me how it was, and I can't talk. He asks me if I'm okay and I just start crying. I tell him I think my stupid phobia made me panic, even though I didn't really see anything in the water. I feel totally insane, and I'm just happy our friends aren't back from their hike to see me behaving so irrationally. We left later that day. Since then, I've become more open to the unknown. I was thinking about it, and it suddenly hit me that maybe something was going on, and it wasn't just my phobia, especially because I never even really saw anything that triggered it. I'm not sure if I just freaked because I was alone, the phobia, or something else. I guess I'll never know, but I'm curious if others have been in a similar situation, or have any insight.